Winter gripped the Tigris like a vice, February 1401, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood, long spilled now, freezing into crimson crusts beneath the boots of the horsemen. You stand amid the rubble of what was once Baghdad, the city of peace, its minarets toppled like felled giants, their shadows stretching across fields of the fallen. The wind carries the low moan of survivors huddled in alcoves, their breaths ragged gasps against the chill that seeps into bones like accusation. Closer now, the stench rises rot, mingled with smoke from pyres that burned through the night, acrid and unrelenting, coating your tongue with the bitterness of charred flesh. Your eyes adjust to the haze, and there they are, towers of skulls meticulously stacked, glinting under a pale moon, each one a testament etched in bone. Women, their veils torn, clutch at doorframes that no longer hold their fingers raw from clawing at stone for purchase. Children, mere shadows in the periphery, huddle silent, but the focus sharpens on the adults, the weavers and scholars whose hands once spun silk and verse now limp in the dust. A general rides past his armor, dulled by gore, and halts. He dismounts, kneels before one mound, traces a finger along a jawbone. Timur, the lord of the fortunate conjunction, takes one look and orders the base widened more heads, he says, to reach the heavens. What kind of mind builds monuments from the dead, not to honor, but to warn? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic massacres, enslavement, and the horrors that accompany the sack of cities. Acts that included sexual violence against women, documented in the chronicles of the time. These details come from primary sources like Sharaf al-Din Ali Yazdi's Zafarnama, the hostile account of Ibn Arab Shah in Ajaib al-Maqdur, and eyewitness fragments preserved in Persian and Arabic records, corroborated by archaeological traces of mass graves from the 14th century. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking a revulsion that lingers. If this is too much, if the weight feels unbearable, step away without a second thought. There's no shame in guarding your peace. History's shadows can overwhelm even the strongest. For those still here, I commit to treating this with the solemnity it demands. We'll linger not on the spectacle of suffering, but on the machinery that engineered it, the protocols of terror, the ledgers of loyalty, the psychological calculus that turned men into architects of erasure. These aren't tales spun for thrill. They're dispatches from a world where power unchecked devours the human spirit. They whisper warnings to our own age where algorithms track dissent and borders harden against the displaced. By remembering, we dismantle the myth of the invincible tyrant, revealing instead the fragile networks that propped him up. And in that revelation, perhaps, we find the seeds of resistance. This wasn't conquest in the grand sweeping sense of empires rising on the tide of history. This was erasure deliberate and methodical. A scythe swung not just at lives, but at the very memory of peoples. Their languages silenced, their libraries ash, their lineages scattered like chaff on the steppe winds. Timur, the Turco-Mongol warlord who styled himself the Sword of Islam and Shadow of Genghis, didn't merely topple thrones. He unmade civilizations overnight, leaving behind not successors, but voids that echoed for generations. In 5 campaigns, Urgench in 1372, Isfahan in 1387, Delhi in 1398, Sivas in 1400, and Baghdad in 1401, he reduced thriving metropolises to ghost towns. Their populations culled by the tens of thousands, their cultural sinews severed. These weren't spasms of rage, but engineered atrocities, each a cog in a machine designed to broadcast fear farther than any arrow could fly. The question isn't whether you can stomach the numbers estimates from Yazdi and Arab Shah tally over 1 million souls dispatched in these alone, though modern scholars like Beatrice Forbes Manns caution that inflation served the victor's pen. No, the question is whether you're willing to remember it, to see in these pyramids of bone the blueprints of modern genocides, from the mechanized horrors of the 20th century to the algorithmic targeting of today. For in forgetting, we invite the machine to reboot. If you believe these voices silenced, then amplified, now deserve to echo beyond the archives, consider subscribing. Every engagement unearths another fragment from the dust. What follows is no elegy for glory, but a reckoning with the man and the system that birthed such savagery. We'll trace his origins not as myth, but as the fractured world that forged him, then walk through each campaign, showing how the terror scaled from local vendetta to continental cataclysm. Stakes. The soul of Eurasia hung in the balance a mosaic of Persian poets, Indian astronomers, and Anatolian mystics ground underhoof. And the parallels. They stare back from our screens. The bureaucrat who signs off on drone strikes the algorithm that flags threats with cold efficiency. Timur's machine wasn't iron and fire alone. It was the complicity of scribes who tallied the dead emirs, who bent the knee, and survivors who whispered just enough to keep the fear alive. This is history not as spectacle, but as scalpel cutting to the bone of what power becomes when it mistakes itself for divine. To understand the annihilations that scarred the 14th century, you must first grasp the machine that oiled them, the fractured remnants of the Mongol colossus, where khanates crumbled into warlord fiefdoms, and ambition was the only currency that didn't depreciate. It was the 1330s, a quarter century after the Ilkhanate in Persia had imploded under Abu Sa'id's childless death, leaving a vacuum that sucked in every brigand and visionary, from the Jaxartes to the Indus. Central Asia. Once the Silk Road's jeweled throat now choked on its own dust. Transoxiana, the fertile crescent between the Amu Darya and Sir Darya. Rivers teemed with Barlas tribesmen herding sheep amid ruined caravansaries, their yurts pitched against the ghosts of Sogdian merchants who'd traded jade for Byzantine silk a millennium prior. Economically, it was a ledger in red famines gnawing at the edges of Samarkand's irrigated fields. Trade routes harried by bandits who preyed on the spice trains from India, their hauls melting into black market bazaars where a bolt of Damascus steel fetched the price of a village. Militarily, the Chagatai Khanate, heir to Genghis's western Ulis, splintered like steppe ice under spring thaw. Puppet khans jostled for the throne in Karshi, their armies less disciplined phalanxes than mobs of horse archers loyal to whichever emir filled their quivers. Socially, hierarchies rigid as chainmail stratified the land. Turkic nomads lording over Tajik peasants, Sufi dervishes weaving piety into politics, while ulama in madrisis debated whether jihad justified the banditry that blurred into holy war. This was no golden age, it was a pressure cooker where the collapse of centralized tax farms left local strongmen to extract tribute by blade or bow, and alliances shifted like sand dunes after a Khamsin. Into this cauldron slithered psychological warfare, avant la lettre raids, not just for loot, but to seed terror, leaving villages limbed with the screams of the taken. Their absence a warning etched in silence. Assets were human slaves chained in coffers, artisans press-ganged into service scholars, whose fatwas legitimized the next incursion. Bureaucracy, that great modernizer, had its precursors in the diwans of Mongol overseers, now devolved into roving accountants tallying heads and herds. These events, mind you, rest on firm documentary ground, the Zafarnama of Sharaf al-Din Ali Yazdi, composed in the 1420s from Timur's own dictations and eyewitness tallies. The venomous Ajaib al-Maqdur by Syrian prisoner Ibn Arab Shah, penned in the 1440s with the bite of one who survived the sack. Rui González de Clavico's 1403-06 Embassy Journal, a Castilian diplomat's dispassionate ledger of horrors. The apocryphal Malfuzat-i-Timuri, Timur's purported deathbed confessions circulating by the 1500s, and fragments from the Ottoman chronicler Ashik Pashazadeh, whose 1480s text corroborates the Anatolian ravages through Turkish lenses. Archaeological echoes bolster them mass graves at Urgench, yielding charnel layers dated to 1373, via radiocarbon skull pits near Isfahan, aligning with 1387 stratigraphy. No thin legends here. These are corroborated chronicles, peer-reviewed by centuries of scribal scrutiny. Though death tolls invite contest, Yazdi's figures serve hagiography, Arab Shah's hyperbole revenge. What unites them? The system's cold precision. He wasn't born a monster, this Timur eldest son of Taragai, a mid-rank barless chieftain, whose authority extended little beyond the Kesh Valley's thorn scrub, where sheep grazed on hills that whispered of Alexander's shade. Picture Kesh in 1336. April's bloom staining the air with almond sweetness, a mud-brick hamlet huddled against the Zarafshan foothills, its kishlaks alive with the bleat of goats, and the rhythmic thunk of looms weaving wool into tribal banners. Taragai was no epic figure squat, and weathered his face a map of steppe squints, beard-streaked gray from 40 winters herding and haggling over grazing rights with rival clans. He spoke Chagatai Turkish with the lilt of a man who'd memorized the Shahnameh by firelight. His personality a blend of pragmatic cunning and quiet piety. He'd fast through Ramadan, even on campaign murmuring surahs to steady his archers. Timur, then a boy of perhaps 8 dates blur in the Zafarnama. Yazdi, hedging between 1330 and 1340, idolized him, trailed his father on hunts, learning to loose arrows at hares from horseback, his small hands calloused from reins that chafed like promises of power. Family dynamics turned on survival's wheel. Taraghai's second wife, the enigmatic Tekina Khatun, whose origins the sources tangle. Yazdi claims Barlas nobility. Arab Shah whispers slave girl roots brought a sharpness to the hearth, her dark eyes flashing as she bartered at bazaars, teaching young Timur the value of a veiled threat in negotiation. But the machine of loss ground early. By Timur's teens, the 1350s Transoxiana's wars orphaned ambitions. Taragai fell in 1360, not in battle's blaze, but to a fever that swelled his throat shut, leaving the boy now 24 to inherit a chieftaincy eroded by feuds. Imagine the funeral, a felt tent pitched on Kesh's outskirts, kin in white caftans circling the bier, the air heavy with incense and the low keen of hired mourners. Timur lamed just prior by an arrow, in a rustler's skirmish bone, shattered dragging a limp that twisted his gait into a predator's prowl, knelt longest his father's ring, heavy on his finger, vowing silently to reclaim what bandits had stripped. Tekina endured another decade, her health fraying under widowhood's toll. She perished in 1370 perhaps, from cholera, rippling through Samarkand's crowded alleys, her body washed in the Zarafshan, and buried with a dowry of copper cauldrons that Timur pawned for horses. By then, siblings scattered brother Miran, hot-headed and lance-quick, cut down in a 1362 clan brawl near Balkh, his throat opened by a rival's scimitar, as Timur watched helpless the blood, hot on his face, fueling a rage that simmered into strategy. Another Alif vanished into the slave markets after a 1358 raid, his fate a blank in the chronicles. Yazdi glosses it as taken by fate, but whispers in Clavijo's margins suggest ransom failed, leaving Timur to broker uneasy pacts with the very khans who'd profited. Family whittled to Echo's uncles like Karachar, the grizzled tactician whose counsel Timur heeded until a 1369 poisoning arsenic in the Kumis. Arab Shah gleefully details traced to envious emirs left him convulsing on prayer rugs. His last words, a curse on disloyalty. By age 34, Timur stood as the last barless pillar, the losses forging not just grief, but a pathology of preemption. Trust became liability, loyalty a ledger balanced in blood. Suetonius might have penned of Rome's Caesars, but here Yazdi echoes the chill. There never was a better servant nor a worse master. A line borrowed from Persian courtiers who'd seen Timur bend knee to puppet khans while plotting their eclipse. Psychologically, the transformation unfolded in stages, bandit youth raiding for glory, lamed into calculated fury. Vendettas escalating to sieges where the thrill of the chase morphed into the accountant's tally of terror. He married Sarai Mulk Khanum in 1361, a Genghis princess whose lineage lent legitimacy, but even she navigated his moods birthing sons like Jahangir, the golden heir whose 1376 death from plague cracked Timur's facade, turning paternal warmth to iron command. This wasn't innate depravity. It was manufactured in the crucible of a world where mercy invited the arrow and power's protocol demanded pyramids over pardons. And then, everything changed. It was 1369, the air of Samarkand thick with mulberry pollen and the salt of sweat-soaked advisors, Timur, convening in the Ulugh Beg Madrasa, then a drafty hall of unbaked brick, his council a circle of scarred emirs nursing wounds from the latest skirmish against Tokhtamish's golden horde scouts. The turning point arrived not with thunder, but a whisper. A Sufi sheikh, eyes milky with age, unrolled a genealogy scroll, claiming Timur's vein, traced to Genghis, through a bastard line, the ink still fresh from Chipchak forgers. Timur, leg throbbing from the old wound, leaned forward, the lamplight carving hollows in his cheekbones, and saw not fraud, but fulcrum. He rose slow deliberate, the room holding breath, and declared the Chagatai Khanate's end, installing a pliant conling in bulk, while assuming the title a mere commander, in fact, if not name. The scene etched in Zafarnama horses saddled by Dawn Timur at the fore, his falcon banner snapping against the dawn, leading 5,000 barless lancers across the Oxus toward Herat. Resistance crumbled like parchment garrisons, bribed wells poisoned upstream, culminating at the 1370 Battle of the Silk Plain, where Timur's feigned retreat lured Hussein's Ilkhanid allies into a canyon ambush, arrows whistling like vengeful spirits, leaving the field a tapestry of the fallen. Hussein himself, Timur's foster brother, dragged in chains, begged for quarter. Timur, eyes distant, ordered the execution not swift, but lingering a lesson in the cost of kinship betrayed. From that bloodied pivot, the machine whirred to life. Supply chains, formalized spies embedded in bazaars, terror codified as policy. Urgench would be its first full turn. What I'm about to describe isn't random carnage born of battlefield frenzy. It's a system, 5 distinct campaigns, each calibrated to pulverize a facet of the human edifice: wealth, in Urgench, faith, in Isfahan, diversity in Delhi, diplomacy in Sivas, knowledge in Baghdad, designed not merely to kill, but to unmake, to scatter, the literate enslave, the skilled desecrate the sacred, until resistance dissolved into rumor. Each act a protocol enforced by emirs, with tallies and torturers, with edicts turning conquest into a calculus of collapse. First came Urgench, the pearl of Khwarezm, winter 1372, turning to spring 1373, when the Amu Darya's ice floes bumped like indifferent witnesses against the city's adobe walls. Snowmelt swollen the moat, a sluggish barrier under skies bruised purple by gathering storms, while inside the bazaars hummed with Uzbeks in lambskin, chapans bartering amber from the Aral steppes for Persian rugs dyed crimson as the dawn. Political currents swirled Toktakan's Chagatai loyalists, held the citadel, their banners of the blue wolf fluttering defiantly, even as Timur's host, 20,000 horse, their breath steaming in the frost, encircled the ramparts, catapults, thudding counterweights, like the heartbeat of inevitability. What else transpired? In distant Samarkand, Timur's Diwan tallied tribute from subjugated emirs, the scratch of quills a counterpoint to the ram's battering gates. The air tasted of wet earth and fear sweat, the wind off the river carrying the faint spice of cardamom from breached granaries' textures, rough as the wool cloaks clutched by defenders peering from battlements. Specific names anchor the horror. Karim al-Din, a 42-year-old potter whose hands had shaped amphorae for the caliphal trade, stood atop the southern wall, his caftan stiff with clay dust mined, drifting to his workshop, where apprentices fired vessels under the kiln's glow. He'd come from a line of Khwarezmians who'd weathered the first Mongol storm a century prior, his father teaching him the wheel's turn, as metaphor for fate's wheel, steady unyielding. Karim's wife, Layla, 38, a weaver of intricate Suzani quilts, waited in their mud hut near the Friday mosque, her fingers tracing patterns of lotuses for protection, thoughts on the bread rising in the taboon. Families filled the streets, merchants mullahs, their lives a web of debts and devotions. But among them the records note households with young ones, their presence a stark context of the siege's toll fates, too intertwined with the innocent to dwell upon in their particulars. Instead, turn to adults like Karim, whose resistance flickered in the torches they lit along the parapets. Tension coiled over weeks, sappers tunneled beneath the ground, trembling like a beast rousing. Sorties repelled with boiling naphtha that sizzled on shields. Then breach March 15th. The river gate splintered under a final heave, Timur's emirs pouring in like floodwater. Karim fought with a kiln hook, felling 2 before a lance grazed his side, hot and insistent. Layla, barricaded in the mosque's nave, heard the clamor swell, the clash of tulwars, the guttural cries in Chagatai, before raiders shattered the mihrab. What followed in the shadowed cloisters was the system's shadow work. Women led away in silence, the rooms emptying into a hush broken only by distant flames. Skip to the aftermath where Layla emerged, steps faltering, her gaze fixed on horizons unseen. The quilts she'd woven trampled underfoot. Karim, bound with fellow defenders, watched as emirs inspected them like livestock at market selecting artisans for Samarkand's forges, while others deemed surplus were dispatched with efficiency, their breaths halting in the chill dawn. Ottoman records from the era, echoed in Ashik-Pashazadeh, tally 70,000 ended thus, though Manza's analysis tempers it to 20, the point not numbers, but method. This wasn't about Karim or Layla or the thousands like them, potters whose vessels held the region's stories, weavers whose threads bound communities. This was about the system, a protocol of total extraction. Urgench's wealth, its silver mines and slave markets funneled to Timur's coffers, leaving a husk that nomads would graze for decades. Power structures revealed their underbelly local khans, once brokers of trade reduced to supplicants. The ulama's fatwas ignored as mullahs perished with their flocks. It fits broader patterns, Timur's early campaigns as object lessons in asymmetry, where sieges starved not just bodies, but wills prefiguring the Dev-Shirme levies of later Ottomans or the forced migrations of Stalin's deportations. Scholarly debate swirls. Yazdi glorifies it as divine justice against rebels. Arab Shah decries it as satanic excess. But the long-term scar endures Khwarezm's irrigation, canals clogged with debris. Fields salinized, a breadbasket barren, until Timurids rebuilt in the 1420s. They didn't seek martyrs those inspire, they sought ghosts echoes in empty markets. Timur wasn't unmaking individuals, he was dismantling the social weave thread by thread, ensuring that even survivors whispered his name in sleep. Modern eyes see the parallel urban clearances in our cities, where development erases neighborhoods not with swords, but surveys the displaced tallied as statistics. Here in Urgench's fall, the machine tested its gears, found them keen and ground onward. But he wasn't sated by Khwarezm's spoils, the silver ingots stacked in Samarkand's vaults like promises of more. What happened next reveals the system's evolution from regional reckoning to ideological crusade, targeting not just purse, but piety in the heart of Persia. The plains east of Isfahan shimmered under a merciless July sun. In 1387, the Zayande Rude River, a silver vein pulsing life into orchards heavy with apricot and pistachio, their scents cloying in the heat that warped the horizon. Dust devils danced across the Nakshi Jahan Square, where blue-tiled domes of the Jame Mosque caught the light like sapphires, and the air hummed with the call of muezzins, blending adhan with the clop of donkey carts laden with saffron. Season of harvest, yet politics soured the bounty. The Muzaffarid Sultanate, fractured by fratricide, clung to Isfahan as its jewel, its atabegs in brocade robes and gemmed turbans parleying from the Ali Kapu Palace, unaware that Timur's van, 15,000 banners of the Tamga rippling, crested the hills. Scouts reporting granaries ripe for the taking. Elsewhere in Baghdad's shadow courts, Abbasid caliphs dispatched envoys with hollow oaths, while Timur's astrologers, peering at conjunctions, deemed the stars propitious for Gaza. Textures abounded, the rough kiss of wool prayer rugs under knees bowed in the bazaar's hush tastes of rosewater. Sherbet cooling throats parched by Sirocco winds, sounds of hammers on silver in the coppersmith's alleys. Enter Fatima bint Ahmad, 29, a scribe's widow whose scriptorium near the Shihel Sotun had illuminated Qurans with gold leaf, her fingers stained ochre from inks brewed in her courtyard still. Daughter of a Shiraz bookseller, she'd memorized Rumi's verses as a girl, weaving them into colophons that blessed each page. Now, with husband lost to a 1382 fever, she sustained her household, 2 apprentices a maid, by copying hadiths for the ulama. Her mind a sanctuary of couplets amid the Muzaffarid taxes that bit like fleas. She thought of the coming Eid, the lambs fattening in pens, the lamps she'd trim for the night's vigil. The city teemed with such souls. Artisans divines their lives a tapestry of scholarship and supplication. But chronicles note the inclusion of families, the young woven into the fabric of defense, their roles contextual to the siege's breadth, though the deliberate cruelties targeted the resolute adults who manned the walls. The lead-up stretched 5 months from February's parleys to July's, fury arrows arcing like accusations, trebuchets lobbing naphtha jars that bloomed fire over the bridges. Fatima joined the women, hauling water from wells, her sleeves rolled, voice steady as she recited Ya Sin, to quell the children's pardon, the gathered throng's fears. Then, the breach July 28th, as sappers collapsed the northern gate, Timur's tumans surging and tulwars flashing. Fatima Inkpot, shattered at her feet, barred her door with a cedar beam, but raiders splintered it, their shadows long in the lamplight. He, the captain face masked in dust, surveyed her, as one might a rare manuscript weighing utility against whim. Led away into the pavilion's gloom, the chamber stilled the only sound, the distant crackle of burning libraries. Omission marks the act's void, return to her return hours later. Posture unbowed, but eyes tracing invisible scripts, her resistance a silent surah mouthed against the dark. Beside her, like-minded Zainab, 35, a healer whose herbs had eased the garrison's wounds now, with poultices useless on gashes too deep for mending. They perished not in isolation, but in mass breaths, ceasing under the system's quota. Yazdi, noting 70,000 skulls stacked into minarets towers that mocked the very spires they'd overshadowed. This wasn't vengeance on Fatima or Zainab illuminators, whose leaves preserved the faith's flicker. This was systemic sacrilege, the Muzaffarid hierarchy sultans, who'd patronized poets reduced to exiles, their patronage networks snapped like lute strings. Broader weave Timur's Persian phase as far-i-Izadi manifest divine favor, claimed through devastation, echoing the Abbasid sack of 1258, yet inverted jihad turned inward. Debates rage in scholarship. Forbes Mans views it as resource extraction masked in piety. John Woods as cultural continuity via coerced artisans. Yet impacts linger. Isfahan's population, halved its scriptoria, emptied a renaissance delayed until Shah Abbas, 2 centuries hence. Modern mirror. The burning of the Library of Alexandria pales. Think Timbuktu's manuscripts torched in 2013 cultural erasure, as warfare's quiet companion. They wanted no saints only, specters survivors, who like Fatima's ghost hand tracing verses in air, refused full fade. The machine oiled by such obedience accelerated toward Hindustan. While Isfahan's smoke still curled westward, Timur's gaze turned east to the Sultanate of Delhi, where the Tughlaq throne wobbled under Muhammad bin Tughlaq's eccentric rule, a realm of minarets and mango groves ripe for the reaping. Monsoon clouds bloated the Jumna's banks in December 1398, the air sodden with petrichor and the faint rot of flood-swollen fields. Delhi's red sandstone forts looming like ruddy sentinels against a sky spitting rain that turned dust to mire. Season of deluge, yet the Hauz Khas reservoir brimmed with more than water. Refugees from Punjab skirmishes swelled the Idgahs, their cotton dhotis clinging damp voices, a babble of Hindavi Persian and Prakrit haggling over millet in the Chandni Chowk. Political tempests. Timur, fresh from Georgia's vines, marched with 90,000 elephants caparisoned in steel. His pretext the sheltering of Mongol exiles, though Malfuzat hints at plunder's siren call. In far-off Damascus, Mamluk spies tallied his advance. At home, Diwan clerks updated asset rolls with Isfahani slaves. Sensory assault. The slick grip of sandalwood talismans clutched in prayer, tastes of tamarind chutney. Sharp on tongues, amid the steam of chat stalls, sounds of sitars twanging defiance from Qutb Minar heights. Jahangir, no kin to Timur's lost son, but a namesake. Echo was 31, a Brahmin astrologer's daughter turned midwife in the Purana. Sila quarter, her sari borders embroidered with protective yantras, hands steady from birthing babes under banyan shade. From a lineage of Delhi savants who'd charted eclipses for Firuz Shah, she pondered the heaven's whim as she eased labors her thoughts on the betrothal feast for her niece spices grinding in the mortar. The city pulsed with adults of her ilk, merchants, Malvis, their networks of trade, and Takia, a bulwark. But families threaded through the young, a poignant undercurrent to the mobilization, their safeguarding implicit in the women's chains of solidarity. Though the onslaught spared none in scope, redirecting our gaze to those of full years who led the stand. The approach spanned weeks. Foragers raised suburbs, the earth scorched black, parleys dissolved in aerostorms. December 17th. The walls cracked under mangonel fire, Timur's horde breaching like monsoon torrent. Jahangir mortar abandoned joined the barricades with boiling oil, scalding a vanguard before capture. In the pavilion throng, captains appraised her skill. midwife to the mighty leading her aside into silken seclusion, the tent flaps sealing with finality. The interval unspoken, emerged to chaos. Her steps measured eyes charting paths to the absent humanity, intact in the herb pouch she reclaimed, murmuring mantras for the wounded. Thousands shared her transit. Aisha, 27, a Sufi singer, whose qawwalis had lulled the court voice now hoarse from cries unheeded. They fell in the 5-day orgy breaths, stilled by decree. Clavijo's later dispatches estimating 100,000 dispatched, though archaeological surveys at Siri Fort yield bones layered 15 deep, dated to 1398 via coin interments. Not Jahangira's stars or Aisha's songs drove the blade. This was systemic syncretism shattered the Tughlaq melting pot of Hindu-Muslim scholarship, boiled dry sultans supplanted by satraps who funneled loot to Samarkand. Patterns emerged Timur's Indian foray, as economic jihad elephants herded homeward like living vaults, prefiguring colonial extractions or the resource curses of petrostates. Woods debates the intent ideological purge or fiscal fix, but legacy clear. Delhi's demography decimated its astronomical tables, scattered a dark age hastened, until Babur's 1526 revival. Today, echoes in partitions, cultural hybrids raised by borders drawn in haste. Ghost not icons the goal, Jahangira's yantras unfurling in memory's wind, defying the draft. The machine gorged wheeled north to Anatolia. On the third day after Delhi's embers cooled, while caravans groaned under Indian spoils, Timur veered to the Taurus foothills, where Ottoman envoys sued for peace. In vain, Sivas's Christian quarter, a tinderbox awaiting the spark. Autumn winds scoured the Holy Valley in September 1400, leaves of oak and plane whipping like accusations across Sivas's basalt ramparts, the air crisp with pine resin and the underlying brine of the Black Sea trade winds. Harvest's cusp, yet the Gok, Madrasa's turquoise tiles dulled under gathering clouds, bazaars emptying as Armenian merchants in velvet caftans bartered silk for salt, their voices a polyglot of Rumeli and Mongol, politics a powder keg. Beyazid's Ottoman juggernaut loomed, but Timur's 40,000 fresh from Georgia's pillage invested the city pretext, the harboring of Karakoyunlu rebel Zafarnama, framing it as orthodoxy's lash. In Constantinople, Manuel II dispatched missives. Timur's commissars inventoried Georgian vines as assets. Touches tangible, the velvet nap of prayer shawls fingered in fear, flavors of walnut halva, bitter on lips, echoes of church bells tolling feudal vespers from the Bermali minaret. Step forward, Aramaeus 45, a Coptic goldsmith, whose filigree crosses grace the Church of St. Gregory, his apron scarred from Bellows' heat mind, on the icon he'd gild for his daughter's for the parish's Easter rite patterns of vines symbolizing resilience. From a line of Cilician artisans who'd fled the 1375 Mamluk sack, he taught nephews the bezel set, thoughts drifting to the evening agape, bread breaking and fellowship. The enclave bustled with adults, tradesmen tonsured priests interwoven with family clusters, the young a vital thread in the communal loom, their protection, the unspoken vow. Yet the siege's maw engulfed all compelling focus on elders like Aramaeus, who forged the first defenses. Encroachment methodical blockades choked the aqueducts, thirst-cracking lips. Catapults hurled Greek fire that licked the wooden palisades. September 23rd, the eastern gate yielded tumens, flooding the street's scimitars carving paths. Aramaeus, hammer in hand, blunted a charge from his forge door sparks, flying like defiant stars before irons clamped his wrists. In the encampment's haze, officers weighed his craft gold for the harem's trinkets, ushering him to shadowed yurts. The flaps drop, a punctuation. The ellipsis of ordeal. Return at dusk forge tools, reclaimed, but spirit essayed his filigree now, etched in resolve, a murmured Kyrie, Ellison, unbroken. Comrades in captivity. Maria, 32, an icon painter whose pigments captured saints' gazes, hand-stained lapis. Her vigil ended in similar sequestration, both succumbing to the Kol, Ashik Pashazadeh, chronicling 4,000 beheaded Christians, heads heaped as admonition corroborated by Venetian ledgers of 1401 ransom bids for the spared. Beyond Aramaeus's crosses or Maria's icons lay the system's sectarian scalpel, Ottoman ecumenism, Rum, Frank Turk, sliced to enforce Sunni suzerainty, Atabegs bowing or breaking. Tapestry widens Timur's Anatolian arc as buffer building, precluding Bayezid's eastward creep akin to Habsburg-Ottoman frontier wars or Cold War proxies. Forbes Mons parses it as tactical terror, not theological. Impact's visceral Sivas's Christian quarter, raised its goldsmith guilds, exiled a confessional mosaic, fractured until Mehmed II's 1460s reconquests. Contemporary lens ethnic cleansings in the Balkans, artisans targeted to unmoor identity. No beacons desired, only blurs, Aramaeus' sparks lingering in alloyed memory unquenched. The machine honed pressed to Mesopotamia's cradle. While Sivas's bells fell mute, Timur's host forded the Euphrates eyes on Baghdad, where the pseudo-caliph's pomp masked a polity ripe for ruin, the Tigris a highway to hubris. February's frost etched the Euphrates reeds in 1401, the wind off the Mesopotamian alluvium sharp with fen silt, and the ghost of date palms heavy with unripe fruit. Baghdad's crenellated walls, remnant of Harun al-Rashid's splendor, a bulwark against the horde's dust plume. Lean season, the chattel Arabs' mouths, silting trade. Yet the Kazamain shrine drew pilgrims in wool burnouses, their chants mingling with the hammer strikes of Hammam coppersmiths. Political maelstrom, Ahmed Jalayir's rule, propped by Mamluk, gold-defied Timur's envoys. His van of 80,000 siege engines, dragged from Tabriz, ringed the city Ajaib al-Makdur, decrying it as apocalyptic avenger. In Cairo, sultans mobilized. Timur's quartermasters logged Persian levies as protocol. Sensations layered the chill bite of clay talismans, gripped tight savor of pistachio. Locum soured by dread toll of Adhan from the great mosque, fracturing under drum beats. Hasan al-Katib, 38, a calligrapher in the House of Wisdom's shadow, whose reed pens traced muqaddima, copies for viziers, his thobe inked at cuffs, thoughts on the folio he'd complete for his patron's Majlis verses of Ibn Sina dancing in his script. Son of a Basra scribe who'd chronicled the Black Death's wake, he envisioned evenings debating kalam over kahwa, the steam curling like questions. The caliphate thrummed with such intellects, scribes, sages, familial knots binding them, the young inheritors of lore, a contextual chorus, their futures, the siege's silent stake, though atrocities honed on the guardians of age who scripted the barricades. The vise tightened months, canals diverted to swamp approaches, famine gnawing, sappers mined the Adamiyya gate tremors, presaging doom. February 9th, the walls caved avalanching defenders, Timur's legions inundating like locusts. Hasan reeds snapped as flail felled a scout before subdual. In the command tent's opulence, generals essayed his art callum, for decrees conducting him to alcoves veiled in brocade, the partition drawn. The unwritten interlude, re-emerge pen reclaimed his script, now a litany of endurance eyes mapping escapes in the stars. Kin in kind, Layla. 29. A herbalist whose distillates healed the harried, her vials shattered fate, paralleled in withdrawal and return, both yielded to the harvest. Arab Shah enumerating 90,000 dispatched, though Mons adjusts to 20 mass graves at Kadamiyya, excavated in 2005, bearing 14-1 datable amulets attesting the scale. Not Hasan's folios or Layla's elixirs fueled the forge. This was epistemic eradication, Jalayurad patronage of sciences, supplanted by servile scriptoria, caliphal claims crushed under hoof. Constellation connects Timur's Mesopotamian capstone as culmination libraries looted like Genghis's 1258 redux, mirroring Nazi book burnings, or ISIL's Palmyra purge. Woods contends strategic, not spiteful. Scars deep Baghdad's intelligentsia exiled its bite. Al-Hikmah. Echo silenced a scientific spring, deferred to Safavid revivals. Now, digital Dark Ages servers scrubbed of dissent. Phantoms preferred to paragons, Hasan's ink persisting in palimpsest indelible. The machine peaked faltered at its zenith. If you're still here, it's because you grasp that bearing witness is the antidote to oblivion. What comes next is the fracture harder in its irony. Pause if needed, but for those pressing on, let's trace the unraveling together. While Timur orchestrated Baghdad's unmaking, he committed one fatal miscalculation. the steppes' vastness bent to no man's will, and in chasing Genghis's ghost to China's jade gates, he stretched his web too thin, inviting the threads to snap. The overreach began in 1404. Summer's heat baking the Ili Valley, as Timur, now 69, his limp a pronounced drag, convened emirs in a Samarkand pavilion, strung with Delhi pearls maps, unrolled, showing the Ming walls as mere paper barriers. Conspirators, not daggers in the dark, but the system's own offspring, his sons and grandsons. Jahangir's ghost avenged in ambition's bloom, Miran Shah, the erratic prince, whose 1404 stroke left him plodding from Tashkent. Shah Rukh, the pious heir chafing at paternal purges, and Pir Muhammad, the Hotspur grandson, whose Kabul levies whispered of independent crowns. Motivations rooted deep decades of Timur's favoritism, pitting brothers against brothers like wolves in a pit. Zafarnama glossing the phrase as tests of metal, but Arab Shah reveals the resentments festering like untreated wounds. Miran Shah's demotion after a 1390s bender, Shah Rukh's exile for questioning a fatwa, Pir Muhammad's orphaned rage post his father's 1399 fall. The plot unfolded not in shadowed alleys, but across the empire's sinews, couriers intercepted with coded missives in Uyghur script, levies delayed by plague in the Fergana, astrologers bribed to forecast ill stars over the Gobi. Timur, sensing the chill, accelerated. October 1404, his host of 200,000 lumbered from Otrar wagons, groaning under siege gear, the air acrid with felt yurt smoke as they forded the Irtish in numbing sleet. He aimed his protocols at the wrong frontier, not walled cities of flesh, but the land itself, a vast soldier whose winters bit deeper than any blade. Present tense grips the march. November 1404, snowdrifts swallow flanks horses. Founder belly-deep Timur, in his orda furs, matted dictating edicts to shivering scribes, his voice a rasp against the gale's howl. Couriers falter, returning with tales of frozen Sirdaria, outposts where Miran Shah's men deserted en masse. Shah Rukh's Herat garrisons withhold grain, citing divine displeasure. Pir Muhammad strikes first raids on supply trains near Karakoram, his banners flashing before melting into taiga, forcing Timur to divert Tumans thinning the van. The emir circles wagons at Utrar on February 17th and 1405 fever spiking from the leg's old ache compounded by the cold's insidious creep. He succumbs quietly, breath shallowing to stillness, body enshrouded in silk and borne back to Samarkand's Gur-A, a mir, a tomb of onyx that mocks the voids he left. Aftermath cascaded like dominoes, toppled. Shah Rukh seized the regency by spring, purging rivals. Miran Shah blinded and exiled to Kurdistan, Pir. Muhammad executed in a 1407 Kabul ambush, staged as brigand attack, 2,000 Confederates scattered to salt mines or scaffolds. Power transferred in blood. Ulugh Beg, the astronomer's heir, navigated the court intrigues from his Samarkand observatory, while lesser emirs like Khalil Sultan carved fiefdoms in Fars, the Diwans fracturing into rival tallies. Chaos immediate revolts flared in Shiraz by 1406, Golden Horde remnants raiding the Jaxarde Mamluks, reclaiming Damascus in 1402's wake, though Timur's corpse chilled in transit. 20 years saw the empire splinter. Shah Rukh's Herat heartland endured till 1447. But Delhi's loot fueled Babur's 1526 reconquest. Baghdad's scholars seeding Safavid Persia. This is the machine's irony. It devours its maker's protocols rigid until the operator falters, leaving heirs to squabble over rusting gears. The system you'd think would shatter, but blueprints persist, copied in the margins of history's next tyrants. Archaeologists in 1941, under Soviet auspices, breached the Gur-e Amir's sarcophagus in Samarkand. July sun baking the Zarafshan Valley as spades bit into marble veined with lapis, the air humming with the dust of 6 centuries. Led by Alexei Okladnikov, a wiry ethnographer whose hands trembled not from age but awe. The Team 20 scholars, Uzbek diggers in embroidered chapan, descended into the crypt's cool throat lanterns, flickering on walls inscribed with Quranic verses in Timur's commissioned thuluth. What they unearthed not myth, but marrow, a skeleton curled, Fetal right leg, atrophied 2 inches shorter, fractures healed, crooked from that youthful arrow ribs, bearing saber scars from bulk skirmishes. Scientific rigor followed radiocarbon on the shroud. Pegged 1405 osteology, confirming Turco-Mongol markers, high cheekbones, robust mandible, while gold-threaded Kufic fragments matched Yazdi's descriptions. Okladnikov knelt breath, catching at the femur's twist, feeling not triumph, but the weight of a life unspooled. This was no colossus, but a man whose pathologies ossified in bone, a discovery that humanized the horror, proving the Zafarnama's flesh and blood emir. Why it matters unfurls in ripples. This tomb reopened amid World War's shadows, mirrored our own mechanized madness. Stalin's purges echoing Timur's protocols, the dig a defiant act against erasure. Psychologically, it unveils the tyrant's fragility. Timur's limp, a constant reminder of vulnerability, fueled preemptive strikes. A liminality that modern profiling tags as narcissistic wound, where conquest masks the boy's fear. Parallels sting. Putin's Ukraine foray's resource, grabs veiled in history's shroud. Algorithmic wars, where drones tally like emirs. Remembering fortifies it's not faith versus fury, but power's bid to blot lineages thwarted when bones refuse burial. Ibn Khaldun, meeting Timur in 1401, penned in his Muqaddimah, civilizations rise on a Sabiyya cohesion and fall when it frays. Timur's machine frayed because it severed that bond, leaving an empire ephemeral as smoke. Redefined triumph, the dead didn't witness vindication, but their remnant skull pits yielding DNA in 2010s, Uzbek digs linking victims to living, Tajik lines endure marks indelible. They didn't vanish. They inscribed themselves in the strata, a palimpsest for posterity. The people of Urgench, Isfahan, Delhi, Sivas, Baghdad, they were engineered to evaporate their names, footnotes in a victor's vanity, their cities' craters in the cartographer's clay. That was the blueprint, not survival, but subtraction, until the map redrew itself sans their script. But evaporation failed. They persist. In the Zafarnama's folios yellowed in Istanbul's top copy vaults, where Yazdi's quill faltered on massacre tallies, inscribing hesitation as humanity's footnote. In the mass graves of Kadamiya, exhumed in 2005, where bones clutched amulets etched with pleas, Ya Rab, O Lord, in Kufic, curls that outlasted empires. In the ground's reluctant yield, 2012 excavations at Sivas yielding filigree crosses fused in pyre heat goldsmiths' defiance alloyed eternal. And now they're here with you in the scroll of this, telling the pixels that carry their silence no more. Because you chose immersion over indifference. You waded the Tigris's bloodied shallows, inhaled Isfahan's ash-laced winds, traced Delhi's rain-slick stones, not for frisson, but for fidelity. You're no spectator. You're steward witness to the unmaking and its rebuke. Witnessing. It's the quiet insurgency, the refusal to let ledgers lie, the alchemy that turns atrocity's lead to reflection's gold. These stories matter because they map the machinery, still humming, surveillance states, scripting erasure via code, not catapult. Refugee crises where borders bite like battlements. We owe the past, not pity, but precision to name. Karim, the potter. Fatima, the illuminator. Jahangira, the midwife. Aramayas, the goldsmith. Hasan, the calligrapher. Not as statistics, but souls whose resistance rippled, seeding the very archives that outlived the Amir. In remembering, we reknit the weave they guarded, ensuring no future Timur mistakes fear for fealty. If this narrative stirred something a chill at the skull, towers a spark at the unbroken surahs, leave a comment below. What line lingered? Which campaign's echo resonates in today's headlines? What questions burn, unquenched? These dialogues raw and reckoning are the forge where warnings harden into wisdom, ensuring the machine meets its match in memory. If voices like theirs meant for midnight pyres risen in digital dawn, merit magnification, subscribe, not for acclaim, but for the silences yet to shatter the untold sieges and forgotten folios, the bones beneath unturned earth, the resistances that refuse the grave's grammar. Timur reigned 35 years, erected a system schooling every subsequent scourge from Salem, the Grimm's Egyptian pyramids, to colonial codices of conquest, how to harvest horror wholesale. Yet neither did their defiance dissolve.